So thanks everybody for coming along. I have remembered to start the recording this time to change the habit of a lifetime. So at least we'll be able to share this afterwards if anybody can't make it this morning. But we're very excited today to share our campaign evaluation roundup. So this morning we've got Sailor from Republican Media, who's going to talk through the out-of-home radio and TV advertising roundup. Then I've got John from Esky, who's going to go over the website and social media and PR. And then we've got Fiona and Sonia from Bluegrass, who are going to go through our sort of perceptions-based campaign evaluation, which is the follow-on from the pre-campaign evaluation that they ran before the campaign started. So it's going to be an information-packed morning, and then I'm just going to give you a little bit of a roundup at the end with kind of the stakeholder feedback that I've had from everybody that's taken part in this, kind of give you some plans of what we're thinking for this year. So without further ado, I will hand over to Sailor. Okay.
Great, thank you, Katie. Just share my screen. Right, I should be loading up. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Katie. So for those of you who were on the last catch-up call, I presented an abridged version of this post-campaign analysis. So this version has the same content, but just with more insights from an AV perspective, from a TV perspective, and an update on the out-of-home as well. So I'll crack on. So just as a reminder, across the campaign, we ran across TV, video on demand, radio, and then out-of-home across all of the localities. Moving on to the AV section, we ran across the full ITV Yorkshire region, which targeted all 15 local authorities. And you can see below, we ran across those two kind of more micro regions as well. So you can see the individual cities and towns that we targeted. From a linear TV perspective, we planned a 4-week flight across Yorkshire TV, reaching 45% of C2D 35+ viewers, an average frequency of 4.4 times per user, achieving a planned 200 adult TVRs. In terms of the delivery, we reached 37% of that C2D audience, but we reached them at a higher frequency of 5.6 and ultimately achieved more adult TVRs of 209 versus the 200 planned at the beginning of the campaign. And that just summarises it there. Moving on to kind of a bit more detail about the actual performance of ITV. Across the campaign, we reached over 935,000 of those C2D audiences. You can see on the left chart there, our actual reach, which is what cover is, kind of built across the campaign. You can see the flight kind of ending on 37% on that week commencing the 21st of April. We kind of built the scale with the use of video on demand as well, kind of last week there, with the success of Celebrity Big Brother. We helped build that kind of incremental reach, and which helped kind of achieve that over delivery on frequency of 5.6. Key to kind of growing that 1+ reach across our audience was dramas and entertainment. So this chart here is essentially just showing you where that cover was built, what programming really helped build that cover. So the likes of Emmerdale, your soaps are always very successful at helping build that 1+ reach. The likes of Catchphrase, Grace from an entertainment perspective, The Chase, and then Celebrity Big Brother at the end there really helping, as well as kind of continuing weekly kind of news bulletins, local news across ITV News. We accessed new releases, including the likes of Protection, and tapped into those high converting programs, the soaps, Emmerdale, Coronation Street, The Chase. They're always kind of highly converting programming. We know that consistently audiences are tapping in and watching this content on the daily. Other programming highlighted kind of the local news, The Morning with James Martin, Love Your Weekend with Alan Titchmarsh. So kind of fan favourites across the campaign. We also kind of accessed a wide variety of programming, which allowed us to kind of reach light TV viewers. So kind of where the market is going, particularly for those who are under that 45 bracket, is continuously moving towards the likes of video on demand, so catch-up TV. But we did kind of access programming where the likes of Celebrity Big Brother, that might be users who only kind of watch TV for that specific program. So I think Celebrity Big Brother was a good example of that, kind of reaching those light TV viewers, particularly those who might be slightly younger as well. And then the quality of the campaign exceeded natural delivery across all parameters. So this is essentially just looking at where our ads were actually positioned in the break amongst other advertisers. So the likes of peak. So these are your peak spots in the evenings where we know more people are sitting down and watching TV. We had an over delivery of 24% versus the impacts that were planned. Centers versus ends. So this is essentially just where your ad's positioned, whether it's at the end of the ad break or in the center. Again, kind of actually having more at the end, kind of that prominent position before we go back into the TV program. And then positioning breaks. So this is just essentially whether your first advertiser after the TV shows kind of got to an ad break, your second or your last. And I've kind of over delivering from an impact perspective from our positions as well. So from a quality perspective and what spots we landed, we exceeded the natural delivery, which is great to see. And then moving on to the video on demand. So we kind of used video on demand to kind of help target a slightly different audience, I suppose, but also build that incremental reach. We used ITVX, we had Channel 4 Plus, and then we had Sky Media as well, where we had slightly kind of nuanced targeting, reaching C2D men, focusing on sport as well. So premium content on VOD helped us deliver our reach, but also access content where kind of traditionally on linear TV, you'd be paying a lot more money. So the likes of The Piano was the 13th biggest show across the period versus all content on more for streaming. On ITVX, we accessed the Fake, where this kind of was the second most streamed drama during the campaign flight as well, kind of increasing that viewership. And then finally, from a Sky Media perspective, Game of Thrones, kind of content like this, which we know has been out for a while, but it kind of makes up for that total viewing hours. A lot of people are investing a lot of time watching this types of content. So yeah, kind of accessing content that traditionally on linear TV, you'd be paying a lot more from a media perspective. And then from a VOD perspective, from a Channel 4 perspective, we over delivered there 207,000 impacts, 80% of which was on the big screen, 4% on desktop, and then 16% on the likes of iPads and iPhones, etc. Then from an ITVX perspective, we had a little over delivery there, 142,000 delivered impacts, 85% was on the big screen, 3% on desktop, and if I just move the chat box, 12% on clickable devices, so your iPhones, your iPads, etc. Slide. On Sky, we reached light Sky TV viewers with programs such as The Equalizer, which ranked amongst kind of most co-viewed VOD programs. So when it's co-viewed, that essentially means that there's more than one person in the view kind of room watching that content, which we know is important from an advertiser perspective because there's more people in the room who can kind of influence a decision. Again, kind of an over delivery of 262,000 impacts, 15% of which was on the big screen, 22% on desktops, and then 63% on clickable devices. So kind of more users kind of using on kind of likes of iPads or iPhones, which kind of does suggest second screening. So the likes, they might have the big TV set in the front room, for example, but they're kind of watching content on their iPads or their iPhones, for example. The new series of White Lotus came out during our campaign flight as well, which actually attracted an average of 1.5 million viewers on VOD and was ranked top 10 most viewed program across the whole campaign period, which just helped bolster that reach as well across Sky. And then secondly, from a Sky perspective, we access short form video on demand. So this was just to focus more specifically on C2D males, those who are interested in watching sports. And again, we had an over delivery there. Sky short form kind of delivered 131,000 in the red box there. And then from a short form sports perspective, just a small marginal over delivery as well of just over 104,200. But this is accessing the types of content on Sky Sports YouTube, as well as the Sky Sports kind of websites as well, where they have content shared on there daily. So then kind of looking at the key learnings from a broadcast perspective, I think number one, the ITV linear campaign allowed us to reach our core audience where we know they're consuming content. It gave us large scale reach across the kind of region. I guess for future and looking kind of into future campaigns, we can look to open this up to different trading audiences to give the opportunity to access more late night entertainment shows. So for example, kind of if we were to buy on an ABC One audience, no, that's not specifically our audience here, we would actually then get access to more late night entertainment, more late night dramas. So they're just little nuanced ways that you can be a bit more strategic to kind of reach different programming. From a video on demand perspective, this really helped diversify our content library and allowed us to build that 1+ reach, but especially reaching those light TV, linear TV viewers who we know are absorbing more content on the likes of catch-up TV. And then finally, we're continuously seeing more diversification of content on the likes of Netflix, Prime, Disney Plus. We know that audiences now are not necessarily just absorbing and being exposed to content on one platform. They're watching a wealth of different programming on a wealth of different kind of platforms. And we could definitely look to include a Netflix or a Prime on plan next time, just to allow us to reach a slightly wider pool of content, but also audiences absorbing different things. Moving on to outdoor, where we ran across bus streetliners. So actually from an out-of-home performance, some of you may remember the last time we actually still had some panels out there in the wild, and the case is the same here. So up until the 20th of June, we currently have a delivery of 129%, which is equating to an additional 5K of media value. So up until the 20th, there are panels that are still out in the region, which has resulted in significant overshow. So kind of, I spoke to Katie last week just about how the message is kind of that more awareness-led message, and actually having this message still out there is not necessarily a bad thing. And what we're actually getting is great media value. So that's kind of a positive of having traditional out of home, is that it actually takes them a while to kind of take these posters off the sides of the buses. So whilst they're still up, we're getting free media value, which is great, across a lot of different bus routes across all those 15 localities. And then finally, from a linear radio perspective, nothing's changed here. We ran across the hits and greatest hits portfolio across the region. And then kind of on your far left there, you've got the planned versus delivered of each station. We planned just north of 7.9 million impacts. We delivered 9.9 million delivered impacts, which resulted in a slightly more cost-effective cost per thousand, which means we actually got more media value for the spend that we put into radio, equating to just over 4,500 in additional media value across the linear radio campaign. And then finally, just to kind of round up from a reach perspective for this campaign. So your top chart there is just looking what we had planned versus a C2D 35+ audience in the ITV Yorkshire region. We had planned between 84 and 86% reach, and we have delivered an 85.43% reach, a higher frequency of 7.67 versus the 7.28 planned, more impacts at just over 12.1, and a higher reach number as well. And I kind of end with saying that with our out of home still out in the wild, I suspect this number to be increasing. So when our out of home is finally posted down, I can kind of give an updated version of this final reach figure. But that's everything from me today. I can answer any questions now in the chat box or any at the end of the session. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Sailor. Some really impressive feedback there, and yeah, just great to see how everything over delivered. So brilliant. Thank you. So moving over to John now, please.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, that was really impressive, Sailor. I think it might actually explain one of the slides I've got later on in my presentation. That's good. And it also, I don't know about anybody else, but I think I'm out of touch with modern TV. I need to few things I didn't recognise there. I need to delve back in. Similarly, some of the content I'm going to share now at the last session was delivered by my colleague Alice. What I've done is I've gone through that and then added in a few bits that hopefully you'll find sort of interesting or useful in terms of some of the learning that we've done. And I'm going to focus mainly on the social media and then some of the impact around that onto the website. So in addition to all of the things that you've just seen, there have been an advertising campaign running on the platforms of TikTok, Meta, Spotify, and across the Reach products. And I'm going to give you a quick kind of explanation as to what they were and some examples as we go through. If you look at this purely in terms of calls to actions and interactions to the website, so this is that somebody has actively clicked onto something, they've not engaged with it on social media, they've not watched a video, they've visited the website. And these reports tell us that during the campaign period that generated just over 121 website visits. And just to break that down a little bit further, a big part of this was through TikTok. You see here all of the messages that were run through TikTok were those that mirrored the TV ad that was shared. So it's those kind of the familiar messages around the what will you miss 2 in 3 message for that kind of consistency there. It was developed and delivered in a few different formats. We tried different things with video, we tried different things with carousel images, and then adapted the campaign to put more resource on the things that were providing a better return on investment in terms of both the reach and those click-throughs that I've already mentioned. And just by way of top line through TikTok, it tells us that that's reached just over 500,000 unique users. And because this is targeted ads, we know that they're in the Yorkshire Humber area that we're targeting. So providing 4.5 million impressions. So you've got just less than, well, you've got around about four impressions per person there, and TikTok itself generated 27,109. Now that's a bit of a hard concept to get around, but I've got a slide later on which starts looking at, I suppose, the return on investment that we get for the different platforms, which you might want to consider when you're planning future campaigns. We also ran the same kind of different variation of the same messages across Facebook and Instagram. The reach here was higher. 929,000 people, the impressions 5 million, and this was the largest generator of direct clicks through to the website at over 76,000. The two other points on this slide here on the clicks, that could be like the like or a share, not necessarily through to the website. So you do get, with a platform like Facebook or Instagram, you get other types of interactions there. And a through play means if it was a video ad, they watch it through till the end. Just pulled this one out because, and again, Alice has mentioned this, but the bar chart that you've got at the top shows you the reach for age and gender across these platforms, and the bar chart at the bottom shows the number that we're clicking on it. So you can see there that the highest reach are your 55 to 64 and your 65 plus, but not by a lot in comparison to the other groups. But when you look at the one at the bottom, which is those that then went on to click, it shows that kind of the older you are, the more likely you are then to click on the ad. Now, there's all kinds of reasons why that may be, but I think if you look at the what will you miss message, and you depends who you relate to within the ad, but if you relate to the older person, perhaps that's the thing that's influenced them there. Again, I can't prove that, but there's a definite trend there that is something that we can take from that. Looking at Spotify is an interesting one, because although here we've got a high amount of impressions at 900,000, reaching 351,000 unique people, whilst the clicks on the ads are lower at 4,890. For anybody that uses Spotify either on your desktop or your mobile phone, I think those clicks they're almost more meaningful, because I don't know if I'm listening to my music and I've got my phone on the side, I aren't necessarily clicking on it too often. So if you're hearing this ad, you're making much more of a conscious effort than to go on to the website. So whilst they're not quite as high, I would say that is somebody that's engaged there. And if you look at this again, the completion rate of these radio ads, the ads which are exactly the same as the ones that went out on the radio, there's building that familiarity with the message. And then the last thing that we also did, which was a little bit different one, this one, was through Reach. So that's the newspaper publisher, who have a number of titles across Yorkshire and Humber, and we used a few different packages with them. One of them is around content marketing. So this is the one bit that was slightly different to the "What will you miss 2 in 3" messages, and it was more case study led, which many of you on this call have obviously helped us pull those case studies together, which was great. And you can see from here that these were run as basically advertising features, but for all intents and purposes look and feel like a news article. That was one of the techniques that we did. And then the other one was what they call a takeover digital display. There's an image on the right there, which is one of those, it's not quite a pop-up, but it's one of those that you it's there and it's in your face. And that was run across a number of different platforms, and you can see there that had 400,000 impressions, and the number of clicks from that is 6,416, which is actually quite high in comparison to some of the other techniques that we tried from Reach. Again, lots of information. I'm obviously not going to read the slides to you, but we'll make this available to you if you want to drill down in any more detail. Now, I mentioned this earlier. What we thought we'd have a look at if you look purely from the perspective of the amount of reach per individuals that we're getting, and then the cost per click on these, to do a comparison between the different platforms that we use. Now, Meta, so including Facebook and Instagram, we didn't use Messenger and WhatsApp as part of this campaign, but that was where our biggest investment was. And as you would expect from that, that's provided the largest reach, it's provided the largest number of impressions, and it's provided the largest number of web clicks. Now, the cost per reach of those per 1,000 people works out at being £21.52, which is a bit higher than some of the others, as you can see there. So in terms of reach, that's not necessarily the best value that it performed for this campaign, but in terms of cost per click, that works out effectively at 26 pence each. So from that one, it does provide the best value. So again, it's looking at, there's a benefit on a mass marketing campaign like this around reach. A very simple call to action on this one, which is just visit the website. It's no more nuance than that. But you can start drawing sort of some conclusions from that to help you plan with future campaigns. TikTok, we put £8,000 in, and I think there's a comma in an incorrect place on that one. I should say 523,000, so it's not 52,000. So again, a reach over 500,000 and a high amount of impressions, which means that the value that you're getting for your reach from there is on that metric is stronger than Meta, but the cost per click is slightly higher. And then we get to the other two with Spotify, where we had a lower spend on there, but again, it's still in terms of the cost per reach, that's provided the best value, but the cost per click is, roughly 3 times that from Meta. But as I said earlier, I think there's an element of qualifying with Spotify that you maybe don't get on the others that are just much more screen based. And then Reach, again, we tried a range of different products there. It's provided a large amount there, 400,000 effectively. This was to give us some access to people who don't use the Meta products, TikTok and Spotify, because not everybody does. I suppose it's more of a conventional news site. Has produced 12,000 clicks, but the reach for this, ironically, the reach for Reach, if you take that metric, is £36.50, which is higher than the others, and is the cost per click. The final column that I've got on here is engagements, which is just, I think you get that from Facebook and Instagram, as I mentioned, and TikTok, and it's the types of comments that you get. And I just thought it might be worth reflecting on the tone of the message here, because you've got some here that, they almost, some of these read like almost too good to be true. I promise they are authentic, but what they're doing is it shows that kind of what they've related with the ad. So they found something in there that made me think and feel. I probably miss seeing my daughter getting married a lot more than I'd miss smoking. They've taken exactly everything that the ad designers have wanted from that. So it's reminded somebody here of somebody that they've lost, their father and their grandfather. And you can see how that what's happened to them has influenced their decision, and they've never touched a cigarette. And then this last one here, which is somebody who's really resonated with that, and you all know this because it's what you do, but it's about having that reason to quit, and that very personal reason, which was entirely what the campaign was got. So we've got plenty of comments like that we can take a look at, and that's just a selection. In terms of the website, just to flag this, and I think Alice will have mentioned this at the last meeting. There is a discrepancy that you get in terms of the data from the social media platforms in telling you how many clicks and how many visits to your website it's generated compared to what the Google Analytics provide. I'm not an expert at this, but from what I understand, it is to do with the way that the cookies work and the way that you access the internet. So this is likely underestimating the number of users on the site from the reports that we're getting, but it's still a significant number because we're able to look at the data from 65,000 of those active users. The squiggly graph that you've got there shows us that whilst the campaign was running consistently in terms of spend throughout the 8-week period, you see dips at the weekend, which again we might want to make a decision that, depending on different platforms, some won't make a difference, but you might say, do we pause this at campaigns if we're not getting such a strong return on investment at the weekend? Because the way that it works, you actually charge per impressions. It probably doesn't make much of a financial difference, but it's something to be aware of. And then the graph that you've got on the right shows according to Google Analytics, where the traffic for the website during the campaign period has come from, and you can see that is predominantly the paid social. Direct is people putting the domain name in or scanning a QR code, and your referrals are from your websites. Other than the paid social ones I've mentioned, unassigned we don't know, and then the others are people searching in yes to quit, what will you miss, whatever it is that they've taken from the campaign. This got a lot of numbers on it. This graphic here shows kind of where people were on the website, and it's got a few other measures on there. Now, what this tells us, firstly to explain, 1 and 2 are both the homepage. We re-indexed it for SEO purposes partway through the campaign, and basically it shows up as 2 separate pages, but you can add those 2 numbers together, and when you do add those numbers together, you will see that predominantly people are going to the homepage and not necessarily much further than that. Now, this is something we've had a few conversations about, and I've got some thoughts and recommendations on. When you landed on the website during the campaign phase, you were met with the campaign film, which you would recognise from all of the TV ads and visuals that were shared in the previous presentation. And then there were a number of interactive elements to it around, like the cost saving calculator, the benefits for quitting. So there's quite a bit of information on there. But then you can see from there that people then are clicking through to the ways to quit, and then access to local services and app. Now, the combination of the app and the access to local services is 1.4% of the overall web traffic. And I've got a slide about kind of comparing that to where we're at the moment later in the presentation. This slide here talks about the top sources of web traffic according to Google. Like I said, there's some discrepancies from this and the data that we get from the other platforms, but largely speaking, it does match in that you've got your Facebook Meta products at the top, then TikTok. You can see some of the Sky video on demands that Taylor and team have delivered there that have been directly pulled through. So that shows that that's not just generating awareness. There's some traffic coming through to that. And this is the slide I mentioned a moment ago. I've just pulled out the analytics just for the past 2 weeks, really, to see what's happening outside of campaign. Now, if the out-of-home bus advertising is still running, then perhaps that is still driving some of that traffic. Some of this could be legacy. Some of this could be organic social media posting. So the numbers, of course, are much smaller than what we saw during the proactive advertising period. But if you look at the behaviour of people using the site now, whereas a campaign like this was that sort of first little nudge around smoking as people going there out of curiosity, now they are delving for more information. So, for example, the average engagement time across all of the users is now 52 seconds. Now, that might not sound like a lot, but if you compare that to the campaign period time, that was just 8 seconds. The traffic that you're getting currently is more engaged, and those visiting the local services or Quit app page is now 12.7% compared to the campaign period, which was 1.4. So just to round up from me, in terms of we've still got some work to do on this. We've going to make the in light of the things I said earlier, we're going to make the local stop smoking services front and centre of the website, because we don't need that video for the familiarity to the campaign. We can literally put that as the first thing you see beneath the menu. I've asked my team to design up exactly how that's going to look. And something else that I don't know if Katie's going to mention this later, but we're supporting on is putting a campaign guide together, which is all of this information being presented at you here, but in a more of a practical form, which will explain all of the activity that's been done, written down lessons learned and recommendations for how you could apply that to your campaign, and then taking some of this for a framework. Again, a lot of people on the call, you know how to run campaigns, but for some audiences that are maybe commissioning and delivering things for the first time, create something that can be used as a tool to do it with yourself and or with other providers. So you are getting a lot of information from us today, but I will wrap up there.
Brilliant, thanks, John. Yeah, loads of information, but really, really interesting to delve into sort of where the website hits came from and you know how long they're staying on for. And I think a lot of practical information we can take for using for our next campaign as well, which is brilliant. So without further ado, I will hand over to Sonia and Fiona to begin on our perceptions
thank you.
roundup.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we're going last, so everyone's heads are already exploding with facts and figures. So we'll do our best. Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and if somebody can just shout that it's all working okay. Is that okay?
Yes.
Katie? Yeah, brilliant. Okay. So yeah, it was great to hear all of that that information, and I guess the thing to say is what we're going to take you through here is perhaps we've seen the facts of the campaign metrics. This is about the perception, so looking actually at just the smokers, the people who smoke, and what the campaign has done. So we are doing the evaluation, the research evaluation, and as we've talked about all of the different things that have happened across the different channels. So as Katie mentioned before, we undertook a pre-campaign evaluation, and we've spoken to many of you, I'm sure, along the way to get a baseline. So before any activity went ahead, we spoke to smokers, people who smoke or have quit recently, and we were looking at some of their behaviours and as well their reaction to some things that the campaign would touch on to get a kind of baseline understanding of opinion. We've gone out subsequently for a post-campaign wave of that evaluation, so mirroring the sample and a lot of the questioning, but also looking directly around recall and then impacts of that campaign. We've got a nice chunky sample, so across those two waves, we've got over 3,000 people interviewed, so 1,700 pre-campaign, 1,600 post-campaign. So that ensured that we had at least 100 people interviewed from each of the 15 areas, so that we can look at any differences by geography. And just to kind of touch on the method, to reassure, I suppose, that it's a really robust approach. We had over 2,000 interviews face-to-face on street, as well as kind of topping up a little bit online using a research panel. And it really just ensures that we're speaking to a good representative sample of people that might not be necessarily that easy to find online, etc. We're really trying to get out there and speak to the population. The sample that we gather is weighted to make sure that it is as representative as possible of your smoking profile. So where we have information locally, we've used that. Where we don't, we use England data to make sure that in terms of the proportions of people from different ages, genders, socioeconomic backgrounds is all representative of the smoking demographic. We also have a sample that has the various locations then also weighted to make sure as a whole we can say, based on population size and the prevalence of smoking in each of the geographies, it's really giving you an account that is as realistic as possible of the people in the area. Little note for the report, we have things that we call statistically significant. So figures that are marked in red and blue are where we can say, for example, between geographies or men versus women, the difference in the findings is something that we can say, okay, we can have confidence that this really is a difference in opinion. And where possible, we've pulled out some comparisons with the findings from Greater Manchester. So the campaign was previously evaluated in Greater Manchester, and we've dropped some of their evaluation stats in, but we're not comparing like for like here. It is really just kind of figures of interest. They had a higher spend, they had a smaller geography that spend was covering, and a more established brand. So just kind of take those figures with that in mind. So to get onto things, we have, as other people have mentioned, lots of further stats and slides sitting behind this report, which I'm sure can be shared with you. We have focused on some key things for today, so we don't bore you to death. So just please take your time looking at that report if you like. There's lots of context, smoking behaviour, lots of detail on each of the local authorities, etc. So we'll kind of keep things quite top level today. I think some of you have seen this statistic before, but amongst your people that smoked, 29% of them remembered seeing this ad. So that's not to say that they haven't, but the people that we showed the ad, we have just under a third that are actually saying, yes, I remember, I recognise that. And that represents nearly 161,000 smokers. We have different channels contributing to that, and no one kind of channel really dominating where that recall is coming from. 20% saying they remember the TV, 14% radio, 18% some online, print, social media, etc. So we have 7% who remembered seeing something in all of these places, only 6% saying they'd only seen the TV, so likely to have seen the advertising or believing they've seen the advertising in multiple ways. Here's an indication when you do compare to Greater Manchester, so the little GM figures, where we do have lower levels of recall, and this is where we have to remember that the spend was considerably higher in Greater Manchester. So this is where we see that biggest impact of that. We won't have lots of these charts with a million figures on to share with you, but just out of interest for this kind of top level prompted campaign recall, just to show you how things do vary by profile. We have some locations that are most likely to recall the advertising: North Lincolnshire, North Yorkshire, Wakefield, having the highest levels of recall. But I suppose we'll always see fluctuations by geography. More important is to look at some of those demographic profiles. So high, moderate and lower is looking at the Fagerstrom score of the smokers interviewed, and quite positively, I think that the highest, most addictive smokers having high levels of recall, so sometimes quite hard to reach groups. We have those over 50, the least likely to recall the campaign. And I think if we look at the socioeconomics, managerial and professional, intermediate, routine and manual, I know the campaign we were hoping to target routine and manual. It's not to say that they didn't see it, but they are less likely than managerial and professional to remember the advertising afterwards. Really strong levels of recall amongst the managerial and professional smokers who did see the advertising. I don't think it will be any surprise that those with children were more likely than those without to recall the advertising, given some of the content in it. But I think it's worth noting that actually minority ethnicity respondents had good, strong levels of recall as well. So we do throughout see some interesting things going on around the ethnic background of the people we interviewed. 20% recalled the TV, and this is, again, as I said, it's facts versus perception. So this is where people think they remember seeing the TV advertising, a mix of people thinking they saw it on YouTube, but ITV Live kind of coming through quite strongly. We see Sky there, so a kind of mix of channels. The people that are most likely to remember seeing the TV are generally the people that had highest recall of the advertising, but I think throughout we see higher levels of recall amongst those people already kind of on that quick or intention to quit journey, people that are already trying to quit or cut down or thinking about it. So that's quite interesting, I think, as we'll see that throughout this feedback. It's reaching the highly addicted smokers, the TV particularly reaching those with the highest Fagerstrom scores, so important to note that. 17% of the routine and manual target did have recall. So when we say it is higher amongst the managerial and professional, that's not to say that, you know, nobody from a routine and manual background remembered it. It's just when we do compare it to the managerial and professional levels of recall, theirs is higher. The radio, you know, I won't focus on this too much because we've already been through, but people generally having similar levels of recall of various places, Hits Radio, Greatest Hit, thinking Spotify as well. I think we've got the same profiles here that are more likely to recall the radio as we did the TV. The interesting difference here being gender comes into it. So men having higher recall than women of the radio aspects of the advertising. And that's quite important because, you know, no offense to the men on the call, but we all know that they're usually the hard nuts to crack in terms of getting them to remember advertising in terms of smoking. So I think that's an important one to pick up on. And the online and print, we showed various different stills and images. Facebook had the strongest levels of recall, where we asked, you know, where do you think you've seen it? And people tended, over a third thought they'd seen it on Facebook. But really quite a wide variety of channels here where people had recall or perceived recall. Instagram's on their TikTok. 1 in 4 saying a pharmacy setting or a healthcare setting, they thought they'd seen the advertising there. So quite a broad range of people recalling different things. And again, a similar range of profiles here in terms of those more likely to recall the online print, nothing standing out as particularly different. I think the interesting thing to note about the online and out-of-home advertising is there isn't that higher recall amongst the highly dependent smokers that we've seen for the TV and radio. And perhaps that's indicating that the broader range of scenarios that they've maybe have been exposed to, therefore something in that has increased or broadened the relevance beyond the most dependent smokers, bringing in those less dependent smokers as well. We showed some of the different stills. We asked people if they remembered seeing each of these, and the image with the 2 and 3 smokers with the gentleman in hospital bed had the highest recall, 40% of people thinking they'd seen that one, followed by the wedding image. This image of the lady at her wedding, the bride, had really high kind of equal levels of recall amongst all profiles, so that we're not seeing a huge variety, men versus women, older versus younger, in terms of the recall. It's quite good at kind of reaching a broad profile, even those who aren't on that quit journey. So people said, I've really got no intention of quitting, I don't want to, were as likely to remember this advert as those who were actively on a quit journey. The next most effective or most remembered were those prominently featuring children's faces. And we did some qualitative information gathering as well. We had some depth interviews with people that had taken part in the survey. There are lots more quotes in the full report, but it really resonated with people. I had people crying on the phone when they talked about the advert because their child was getting married soon, and it had really struck a chord with them, and really just picking up on how people put themselves into the advertising, saying, you know, being stuck in a hospital like that, they could really imagine that being them, and also starting to think about the impact that would have on people that they loved. So we will look at the campaign impacts here, starting with the messaging. So pre and post campaign, the messages were already pretty credible pre-campaign. We had in the kind of 70s up to 90s for levels of agreement. We focused in on strongly agree, and we can see that post-campaign, a couple of the, I would say, more specific messages from the campaign have shifted post-campaign to a stronger level of strong agreement. So we have 31 pre-campaign going to 35 in smokers will be taken from their families early, and 30 shifting to 34%. That if you smoke, you may miss out on things you value in life. Pre and post-campaign strongly agree. And that's further evidenced in terms of those who have seen the campaign and those who didn't see the campaign. So within our post-campaign evaluation sample, we can really see, if we split out the strongly agree versus agree, amongst those who have seen the campaign, their levels of strong agreement for almost all of the messages are higher. So the campaign really working to strengthen opinions around some kind of already quite believable messages. We asked people to pick the 3 statements out of this list that they felt best describes their view of the advertising, and coming through most strongly is making people stop and think. A really thought-provoking campaign. It is hard-hitting, but people feel it's carrying an important message and is easy to understand. The things that we wouldn't want to see up at the top of this chart are down the bottom, so that's great. So being patronising and inappropriate shown in adverts. So that balance between the hard hitting and tipping the line into something that's perhaps gratuitous or inappropriate not being a factor here. People who are more likely to have chosen it was aimed at people like me, again, quite interesting, I think. Not surprisingly, those with kids really feeling like this is a campaign that's about me. I can see myself in it. But less dependent smokers coming through here as well. So whilst we see the most dependent and addicted smokers most likely to remember the campaign, it's then those that have the lowest level of dependency who believe it is aimed at them. So perhaps in here starting to see some denial or distancing from the most addictive smokers who are definitely remembering it. It's you know, it's very memorable to them, but trying then to not perhaps feel that it's then aimed and targeting their behaviours. What the campaign does really effectively is to make people think. So, you know, we had right top of that previous slide, it made me stop and think. And 69% of the smokers who saw it are saying it made them strongly think about quitting. Those who are already kind of in that mindset on the journey are more likely to feel this way, as well as those with children. And just bringing in a comparison with Greater Manchester here, although we saw lower levels of recall, what we can see is then amongst those who did see it, it's having a very similar impact. So they had, you know, almost identical figures in terms of then the feedback on making people think about quitting. And they also saw the similar kinds of profiles. So middle-aged smokers, those already trying to quit, having the strongest levels of agreement. The impacts of the advert, I mean, I think you would be happy for people to pick any of the things on this list, really, apart from not doing any of them, which is down the bottom. And we only had 8% of people feeling the campaign didn't impact them in any way. Some really good things coming out strongly, making people wish they didn't smoke, think about the impact of smoking, making people more concerned, thinking about what they might miss, encouraging them to think about quitting. We're all seeing kind of over a fifth saying that the campaign had that impact on them. And really kind of mirroring again the results that they saw in Greater Manchester in terms of the impacts of the campaign and what it was making people think about. Here's the kind of big ticket slide. What did actually people do? And it's a really great a great fact, really. 81% who saw the campaign took some kind of positive action, and that's just brilliant, really. So there were 19% of people who saw this campaign who said that they didn't do any of the things on this list, but right at the top, thinking seriously about quitting. We've seen and said several times now it is a very thought-provoking campaign, but 30% said that they cut down directly as a result of seeing or hearing this advertising. So that's representing, you know, even if we take into account 29% of the smoking population saw the ad, and then 30% of that 29% cut down, that's still over 48,000 smokers across the area cutting down on the amount they smoke, a little or a lot, and 15% making a quit attempt. So over 24,000 smokers making an attempt to quit. And they've said that that's as a direct result of this campaign. 8% of those still not smoking, 7% of those making an attempt but starting again. Again, we can look at who is more and less likely to do that. Older people and those in routine and manual occupations are less likely to take action based on the campaign. So just something to note there around who it's actually influencing to make a decision to do something. We can again compare amongst those who saw the campaign in GM and our area, and very similar proportions of people making an attempt to cut down or quit as they had across Greater Manchester based on the campaign. And the final thing here around the impacts. So sometimes what we see is that people that have seen the campaign do, 81% did something. Sometimes that isn't enough to translate into a population level shift pre and post campaign. But in this case, we can see actually just at a total level, so this includes people that didn't see the campaign, people that did, it has done enough to shift from 9 to 13% of people trying to quit completely smoking. And then on the right hand side, it's also shifted pre and post campaign from 6 to 8% wanting to stop in the next month, and it has reduced the proportion who don't want to quit smoking at all. We've seen that go from 23% to 20% post campaign. So measurable impacts, pre and post campaign in the matter of a few months between these two waves of research with a mirrored sample. We're just going to summarise. So some of these points in summary will reference things that are gone, but that we go into a lot more detail in the full report. So please, again, feel free to kind of read around some of these points a bit more. But as in Greater Manchester, it's a thought-provoking campaign, and it's been a success. It's prompted those who smoke in your area to take positive steps. Higher levels of recall, however, would be needed to maximise the extent to when this can translate into population level impact across the board. And this isn't about whether it's an effective campaign, whether the messages resonate. It's about reaching more people, so higher spend and higher frequency of penetration. There are indications we need to find ways to increase recall amongst those in routine and manual occupations, although positively it's working well for the most dependent smokers. They are remembering it. Whether they then are, as likely to feel that it's telling them to do something, they're obviously a challenge, but they remember it, and that is very important. And as well as those from different ethnicities as well, we're seeing kind of a broad range of people who this campaign is reaching and resonating for. Grandparents and parents, unsurprisingly, as we say, given the content, are affected by the campaign, quite often strongly so. The messaging is still impactful for non-parents. We're not seeing, people without kids just being really unaffected by it. That's certainly not the case. However, especially qualitatively, when we spoke to a few people without children, they talked about kind of broadening the scenarios included. So they said, well, could it be something about the impact I'm having on my partner, leaving them behind? So something that may increase the relevance for those without children and where they can see themselves reflected. In the sort of wider context piece that is part of the full report, we'll see that health and family are really the major motivators for quitting, and therefore this campaign is very effective. It's emotive, it's motivating. And the other messages, the more factual messages, the 2 and 3, they're believable, and the campaign is working to strengthen agreement. So people didn't have a big issue with the messaging before, and it's really just solidifying that. Those who smoke generally aren't finding this campaign to be patronising or judgmental, despite describing it as hard-hitting. And again, in the qualitative feedback we got, that came through quite strongly, that people really thought this got the tone right. It had that impact without tipping over into being preachy or pushing people just to turn off because it was too much. But people talked about room to include more hope messaging. So harm versus hope, as we know, the constant kind of balancing act. So they talked about a kind of next step being all this, what will you miss, being very effective. But then, okay, well, what will you gain? Is this another route we can go down? They talked about, well, we could gain the flip side of all these scenarios, that could be kind of the focus. And we see financial benefits as the kind of third spoke in the wheel of the motivators for quitting: health, family, finance. It's a major driver, and people talked about, you know, gaining money being a kind of a missing piece of this campaign puzzle, perhaps. And that's it from me. So I will stop sharing. Bit of a whistle-stop tour, as I say, lots of detail and all of the, you know, breakdowns where there are differences between local authorities, etc., and demographic profiles can be found in the full report.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Such a lot of interesting information to really for everybody to digest. So we will make sure that we get this report round to everybody afterwards, along with the presentations as well. As John alluded to earlier, he's also working on a report that will kind of look at all of the different advertising options and the spend and recommendations for the future. So I've just got a couple of slides I'm just going to run through because I'm aware we've only got 3 minutes left and I don't want to pull you too far over the edge, but I just wanted to quickly go through some stakeholder feedback that we got from the people that kindly completed our survey. So hopefully you can all see that. Right, so very quickly, what went well? So people were generally very happy with the campaign coordination, responsiveness and support provided, and the work between the agencies, which is fantastic. We had consistent communication throughout the campaign period. One message and many voices, so this kind of really unified approach across the board, and the reach of the campaign, I think everybody's agreed that's been really impressive. So just a few little quotes from people: a brilliant joined up campaign involving multiple partners, lots of comments on communication, and sort of having me acting as the liaison between the agencies worked really well, just to make sure those messages were channeled out correctly. Very quickly, areas for improvement. I think the feedback that we had was kind of lead times in terms of getting the toolkit and the resources out to people, which was obviously a variety of reasons, but we do have the opportunity to try and manage that a bit better this year because we're not under quite so much time pressure. Another big one was kind of clarity of roles in terms of the PR, and I think one way we could really improve that is by having a more dedicated kind of PR focus where we could commission an agency that will actually issue those kind of localized PRs on behalf of local authorities, because we do appreciate it's really, really hard sometimes to get things approved and get things out there. And I think if we could do that from a central location, we might be able to get more coverage in your local area, which wouldn't mean that local authorities couldn't issue their own press releases. It would just mean that we get something into local media faster. And in terms of actually development of the campaign, I think it's something that we can do very much collaboratively, whether we've got a small team that can help in that development of the messages and working together with the agency, because we are planning to develop our own campaign from scratch this time, and just kind of looking at the toolkit to make it as adaptable as possible for the local authorities, because I am aware there was a lot of information, a lot of different things. There were some people that were struggling with the Canva. I think having that, whether we assign some budgets, having a Canva team that we create to make it easier rather than people having to create their own resources within Canva using one account. Just looking at how we can make that more fluid for everybody. So just to kind of talk about what the next steps are, we're going to get these evaluation reports finalised and circulated to our partners. I am working with Kirsty Tunnicliffe as well to put on a COI kind of overview, which will be a bit more, probably won't go into as much detail as this one, where we can really look at those kind of top level, you know, what we've learned, what went well, what we're going to do next time. And then following on, once we've kind of prepared a proposal for what we want to do with this year's campaign, and agreed it with all of the partners, made sure everybody's happy with that, then it'll be moving on to discuss things with our procurement teams here, and looking at the development of the campaign once we've got those agencies procured to work with. And then we are hoping to do 2 campaign bears in Q4 of this financial year, which allows us that time frame to really make sure that we've got time for the collaboration, the message testing, and make sure we can get the information out to partners in a timely manner. So stop sharing. 1 minute over, which I think is quite impressive. And just if anybody's got any quick questions before we finish up for today, please do let us know. Oh, great. Thanks, Jess. We've had Jess on the call from Greater Manchester who developed and did everything with this campaign over there. So I invited her along to come and see what our results were. So thank you very much for coming along. And yes, we will, of course, share the slides with you. And yes, we'll kind of round up all the comments that we've had and feedback to everybody in the. But just thanks so much to all of our contracted research agencies and the advertising and social media and web all been fantastic to work with, and it's brilliant to see it all come together anyway. So thank you very much. So I'll get the roundup sent out on an email afterwards, and obviously we did remember to record this time so we can share it with other people as well. So thank you very much, everybody. Speak to you again soon.
Cheers. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Well done.